Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Bryce. How are you?
Good, thank you. So, today, I mentioned this in the last episode. Like, really, it seems like we're living in the future right now.
Yes.
There's, all these there's two, I guess, commercial flights going into space, advances in technology and medicine. I don't think there's a better time than for us to explore a topic that really we've had on our list for quite a while, and we've never really come around to it till today. And that, of course, is sci fi books or science fiction, even in general.
It's an area that I don't know a lot about, so I'm really looking forward to listening to our two expert guests that we have on today with us.
Yeah, I don't think we could have asked for two better guests to be joining us, because anytime the topic of sci-fi comes up, it's like it's got to be these two here. So first, let's introduce, of course, member of the Overdue Finds family. She was last on with us on our While You Wait episode, giving us some picks for titles you'll want to check out while you wait for some other titles to come in, maybe with lots of holds. And that, of course, is Meg DeForest. Meg, how are you today?
I am great. I think, as I said earlier, I've been like preparing for this episode in some way for my entire life. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Nice. And also joining us today for like the first time in I can't believe this. It's been 2 years. The person was last on our episode all the way back in 2018. So technically it's been like 3 years. And it was our episode where we just talked about podcasts. And we're so happy to have back joining us today, Vicky Varga. Vicky, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty great, and I am super excited to talk about this topic. This is very near and dear to my heart. One of my absolute favorite genres to read, so I can't wait to share some of that excitement with all of our listeners.
It's funny because I do remember that last episode that you were on, and I think we had probably a conversation as we are wrapping up, and I was like, and I think I probably said something along the lines of, "Oh, like obviously you're interested in podcasts, but is there other topics that you're really interested in?" I believe you may have brought this up even on that show, and you're like sci-fi, like.
Put me in, coach.
And it's funny because I've talked about this before, where we have this like list of episode ideas, and it gets updated occasionally, and by next to some of those episode ideas we have people's names jotted down. Just they'll occasionally bring it up. And sci-fi books is that one where it's like, Vicky, I've always had your name next to it, and as I've gotten to know Meg more, I'm like, Meg's got to also be on that episode. So yeah, it just everything slowly eventually comes together.
The podcast episode was a pre Caroline episode, so I'm really looking forward to having my first recording experience with Vicky today.
All right, so before we get into our overdue finds picks, I want to remind everybody that you're invited to join us on Thursday, September 9th for an evening with Eric Klinenberg, a fundraising event presented by the Friends of the Edmonton Public Library. This special online event offers a selection of unique at-home experiences to enjoy. 100% of funds raised will go directly towards Ready, Set, Read, EPL's new program that delivers an age appropriate book to a child's home monthly from birth to 5 years of age. Eric Klinenberg, acclaimed author of Palaces for the People, will share how shared spaces such as libraries and parks are where crucial, sometimes life saving connections are formed. Tickets start at just $5.50 each. So, Caroline, we were actually talking about this event before we hit record today, and there's some actually really cool, like at-home packages available. So you can get some wine delivered and listen to this amazing presentation from Eric Klinenberg. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a great fundraising event, and hopefully our listeners will grab a ticket.
I agree. And if you take a look at the website, there are different options, different prices, so people can pick out what works for them and enjoy this special event through EPL.
All right, so Overdue finds picks. Vicky, it's only been 3 years. I can't believe where the time has gone. So, what have you been enjoying lately? And is it going to be a sci-fi book, or are you going to save that for our next segment?
No, it's absolutely sci-fi. Yeah, when you said a moment ago that let's before we jump into the sci-fi, I was like, no, we're gonna jump right into the sci-fi. It's the genre I read the most. So, of course, one of the most recent books I finished is The New Wilderness. It's speculative fiction, near future, about a world where basically, I guess it's post-apocalyptic. The world's kind of falling apart, and that's kind of my jam. I kind of like those sorts of stories. So there's a mother and daughter relationship at the center of it that's also pretty interesting. So if you like kind of survival stories with that, post-apocalyptic edge to it, I'd really recommend it.
Vicky, I want to ask, how do you think you would do in a post-apocalyptic scenario? Because I can tell you, for me, my answer is not well. But I don't know if you're drawn to them. Maybe you could see yourself there.
I think about this quite a bit. I'm growing. I've got a fairly good-sized garden this year, and I'm about to get backyard chickens. I'm thinking about backyard bees as well, kind of, just in case. I want to have a little bit of food security. And my goal for next summer is to start backpack camping. So I want to, get some equipment. And my partner said, this is all related to your doomsday stuff, isn't it? And I was like, well, maybe a little bit, having some idea how to survive in the woods might be a good idea. So right at this point in time, I would rate my survivability fairly low, but I'm working on it.
Well, we'll have to have you back so we can get an update.
Check in.
We'll have our special Doomsday Preppers edition of Overdue Finds.
Put that on the list.
Yes, Vicky Varga.
My name.
Yeah.
When I worked downtown, my staff there knew all about my doomsday prepper leanings. So it became a bit of an on-running joke that, when the apocalypse hits, go to Vicky's house.
It's better to be prepared than not. So it's been a tough year. So I get wanting to maybe be prepared for the unknown.
Well, when this all hit, when the pandemic hit, I did have a moment of, this is too soon, I'm not ready.
Give me a year, then you can have your
I thought I had a decade.
I don't have 2 years worth of food in the home yet.
Or toilet paper.
Oh, yeah. Meg, how about you? Do you also have a sci-fi pick?
I do. I was going to try not to, and then I picked up a book yesterday, and I stayed up way too late reading it last night, and I was like, nope, this has to be the new pick. It's the most exciting thing. So I started reading The Echo Wife by Sarah Galey. Yeah, I see Vicky nodding. It's basically if Gone Girl and Stepford Wives had clones. I think is the best way I can describe it. So it's kind of a domestic thriller, but it's very sci-fi. The main character, Evelyn, is like a very brilliant scientist who has figured out how to clone people, but it's really only been used as body doubles for politicians or growing organs for people who need transplants. And her ex-husband has cloned her into a more biddable and helpful housewife, and she finds out about it. And that's sort of the setup at the beginning of the book. I won't sort of spoil what happens after that, but that's kind of the setup, which I just thought was very cool and take on it I hadn't sort of seen before. So yeah, I definitely recommend.
That sounds really intense. Just when you were talking about it, it made me also think of the movie The Island. Did you ever see that one? It's got Scarlett Johansson and Ewan McGregor in it. It came out in roughly, I think, 2005. But basically, it turns out they're clones from these very rich and famous people, or just very affluent people. And essentially, they're created to really harvest their organs if their real life counterparts actually ever got sick. So yeah, those type of tales are always interesting to me. So yeah, that sounds like a really good one.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. And I think it's kind of that weird mix of like what if that you get from science fiction, but also like how does this fit into like society and our real reality as we start to get some science that's kind of getting closer to it. So yeah.
Nice. Caroline, if you had the chance, would you clone yourself?
No. I don't think so. I don't know. I probably should, give it some more in-depth thought, but I'm going to go with no.
I don't want to share my stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's like multiplicity, right? Like you start having too many clones and they just take over your life. Like I feel like that,
I would definitely have one like just to clean and cook and
Yeah.
all that other stuff. Do laundry.
Fair.
Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
I don't have a sci-fi book. That would have been a good
Would have
thing to throw in there, but I don't. I recently have been watching the TV show Superstore. It's a sitcom that originally aired on NBC. EPL has the first 3 seasons on DVD in the collection. It's a workplace comedy about employees at a mega store called Cloud9. You could also kind of call it like Schmall Mart if you wanted. And it's just about their life in St. Louis, living and working. Living there, working in the store, you see their day-to-day lives, the ways that they find things to do to put in the days. There are romance plot lines, there's corporate America plot lines, there's the day-to-day job feeling to it. Really great actors. America Ferrera, Ben Feldman, Lauren Ash does such an amazing job. She's probably not a name a lot of people know, but she plays a character named Dina, who is kind of like an assistant manager type. She's by the book. She loves her birds, and one thing that really sums up her personality is she paid extra to get the radio taken out of her truck. So she wanted to buy a new truck and doesn't really care for music. So she had it taken out before she took it home. Mark McKinney is also in it. He plays the manager of the Cloud9 Superstore. It's just a very funny show. Like with a lot of things, the more you get into it, the more you know the characters, the funnier it starts to become. So stick with it through the first season, and I really recommend where it goes.
Superstore is a show that I've not watched yet. It is on my ever-growing list of stuff to watch and read. But I remember seeing the ads for it on TV. I know it has actually a fairly big cult following, and it reminds me of it looks like it was kind of like a cross between almost like Office Space a little bit, and I'm trying to think what else I was thinking of, but yeah, it just looks like that type of humor anyway from the ads. Am I close there?
I think so. I think it's like the Office Space meets like Parks and Recreation, and in that kind of world, the cast, there's a fairly diverse cast, given current TV. I think, actors with a lot of different backgrounds playing characters who come from different backgrounds, including socioeconomically, and that plays out really interestingly around the characters who are at Superstore and why they're working there and all of their motivations. I will also say it takes a little while. It's a few seasons in, but there may be a cameo by one St. Louis Stanley Cup in the show. So
what? Oh well, now
you hooked Bryce. It just went to the top of the list immediately.
Bryce is now going to watch 6 seasons of Superstore for a 5-second cameo.
Pretty much, yeah.
But it's a very good one. They clearly know what they're doing, but it's just a really fun show.
I have to ask because I've growing up, I did work a retail job. Has anybody else here also worked a retail type job?
Oh yeah, Blockbuster Video, a thing that you have to
That's
explain
right.
to kids today. Like, what was this video
yeah.
store? But yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those things where, I think I'll probably also enjoy it knowing I've worked in that type of environment before. So no, it looks really good, and glad to hear that we have it on DVD. That's awesome.
Yeah, the first 3 seasons you can borrow from EPL. So Bryce, what have you been enjoying?
Yeah, so I also have a TV series as well. There was news the other day that unfortunately Bob Odenkirk had needed to be rushed to the hospital on the set of Better Call Saul. Right now they're filming their final season. I believe it's season 6. And I know we've kind of brought that show up on a few times, but I don't think it's really ever been my actual overdue find pick before. So that's my recommendation today, is the whole series Better Call Saul. So it is a spin-off of Breaking Bad, but that shouldn't hold you back from actually checking it out. I know kind of the whole idea of spin-off series have not been great in the past, but if you are a Breaking Bad fan, I really hope you've at least started to watch it. And even if you have not watched Breaking Bad yet, I think you can still watch this series and really enjoy it. Now, the series follows defense attorney Saul Goodman, who is, of course, played by Bob Odenkirk. And we learn a little bit more about his past and learn that his real name is actually Jimmy McGill. We learn all about his history and why he ends up representing some pretty bad people, and why he changes his name to Saul Goodman. The first season, I will warn you, kind of, Caroline, like what you were saying too, maybe the first season of Superstore isn't necessarily slow, but I will say for Better Call Saul, be patient with the first season. It's probably my least favorite out of the series so far, but stick with it because you definitely will be rewarded with some of, in my opinion, some of the best dramatic scripted TV that's on right now. So yeah, stick with it. It's really good. The cast is also amazing. Obviously, Bob Odenkirk plays Saul Goodman. And the one actor who's also really good in it is Michael McKean, who he was on SNL, and of course, this is Spinal Tap. And he plays Saul's brother, who is actually one of the most respected attorneys in Albuquerque. So we set up a really nice story here, and how kind of we see Saul kind of go down the wrong path. So Better Call Saul is my pick, and we hope Bob Odenkirk is feeling better, and wish him all the best.
When I heard the news about him, I thought of you, Bryce, because you had recently mentioned his movie Nobody as your overdue finds pick. And when I was putting the list together, looking up the movie and then Better Call Saul, I spent a bit of time looking into that. They all sound great. And so I was sad to hear that news, but happy to hear that it sounds like he's doing well so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed he gets better. All right. So the reason why we're here today, of course, we're talking all about sci-fi books. Vicky, I'm going to start with you here. Obviously you just had a sci-fi book recommendation, but have you always enjoyed sci-fi books? And what are some of the first titles that you remember reading that really got you hooked?
As far back as I can remember, I've been reading sci-fi. So I remember watching TNG when it first aired at my dad's knee as, a little tyke. And so that was probably my introduction to science fiction. But in thinking back on some of the titles that I can remember that really had an impact on me, there was an author, Monica Hughes. She wrote a number of children's books that were science fiction. And the one that I just loved was Invitation to the Game. And it's where we'll talk probably a little later about other types of sci-fi, but it probably sparked my love of space opera or space opera adjacent fiction. So it's a book about this group of kids sort of being trained for this mission. And there's a big twist in it that, again, as a kid was just delightful. So I loved that, and the Wrinkle in Time series by Madeleine L'Engle. I probably read them when I was slightly too young for them. The first two books I remember really enjoying, but the third one got very confusing. It was a little maybe above my head at the time. So I keep meaning to go back and reread that. I've reread A Wrinkle in Time, but not the rest of the series. And another formative set was the Irobot books I read as a kid as well. Really classic stuff in there, and just really spoke to me. I read that probably in junior high, and they're just such good stories. Like when Asimov is on his game, he's really on his game.
Isaac Asimov is somebody who, it's funny because I touched on this last episode, I'm not a big sci-fi books fan. I have a lot of respect for, people who enjoy those type of books. It's just not necessarily my cup of tea, or maybe I just haven't found the right book for me. But Asimov is somebody who, even I'm not a sci-fi fan necessarily, like that's a name like, and I think most people know, like you could go into any library or bookshop or whatever, and you'll probably see dozens upon dozens of his books.
Yeah, he has some pretty great ones, though. I can't read a ton of his stuff because I have a problem with authors in the 50s having these big ideas, these huge ideas around, life, the universe, and all of this. And yet gender roles don't evolve at all. Like they're incapable of sort of thinking about women being anything other than housewives, despite all of this great imaginative stuff that's happening elsewhere in their books. So I have a hard time sometimes reading things written about the 80s, the mid 80s, because of that it's like, you couldn't have gone just that step further with that.
I don't often recommend going back to those for people who are maybe new to science fiction. Like, I think if you know the genre, you know what you're getting into if you're reading Asimov and some of those. But, like, yeah, he's got, like, I forget the name of the book, but there's, like, a series where there's, like, women on the moon and, like, their boobs are floating a lot. And they're all very submissive to the guys. And you're like, I'm glad to see that space is very, 1950s. Like, I don't know what's happening in this story. So, yeah, reread the old ones with a little grain of salt if that's where you're going to start would be my, my vote.
I second that.
Talking about the role of women there, it kind of made me think of the Jetsons, and Jane Jetson she was a stay-at-home mom, but they had Rosie the robot, and Jane, she just stayed home and hit the button for dinner. But yeah, once again, I mean, I know we're talking about the Jetsons here versus sci-fi books, but same thing. It's supposed to be set in the future, and it just has these very 1960s and pre that anyway stereotypes in it.
At a very surface level, I really like in an early, maybe even the first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, there's a very prominent shot of a crew member walking around in the scant outfit, which is like the future skirt for men. And then, like, once we had that establishing shot, it's like, oh, okay, we're good now. And totally back to
let's never do that
gender
again. And in fact, you never see it again in the entire series.
You never see it. You never see him. It's just enough that it's there.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry saw it and he's like, no, we got it in. We're done.
Go back to having his wife in like a skimpy outfit, which is odd, but that's a whole other topic.
Meg, how about you? Like, is obviously for as long as we've been working together here on the podcast, I've known that you've been into sci-fi, and a lot of course, we joke around on here, but a lot of your Overdue Finds picks are sci-fi books, which I think is awesome. But is sci-fi genre that you have just always gravitated to, and like, what are some of the first titles for you that really got you hooked?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably similar to Vicky. I read a lot of those books growing up. I think of myself probably as more of a like science fiction and fantasy reader. Like I think that there's a lot of crossover in that kind of speculative fiction area. And so I probably would have started on more of the fantasy side of it as a kid, but I remember reading books like The Silver Pen, which was about a bunch of kids who had like their moms had taken a drug as when they were pregnant, and they all grew up to have like psychic powers and things like that. And even I think like chrysalids and things like that. I remember reading those kinds of books. And then, into some of those, like I loved Dune. I loved Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness is one of those. And that is one that I feel like even in our modern day, I feel like you can probably start with. It's, again, kind of an interesting take on gender. She did say later that she wished she had made up pronouns. She used he pronouns in it as like gender neutral because she wrote it in the 70s, and she sort of felt like that's what she had to do. And then years later, she sort of said, I wish if I was rewriting it now, I would change the pronouns, because she has this alien that basically every time they reproduce, they can switch their gender. And so they can be both father and mother. And then the rest of the time, they don't have any gender. And so it's actually kind of a really interesting series. But yeah, those were kind of the things I started with. And I think we'll talk about it a bit later, but I do like those kind of big worlds that you can get in science fiction where like you can create this whole society, and it can kind of turn on its ear maybe some of the expectations that we have about like what life might be like. So I love that.
You mentioned Dune, and I have to ask you, because we've got a Dune movie coming out here later this year. How excited are you for that movie? I thought somebody who's never read the books or have seen the original movie. It looks really cool, but do you think it's going to be something that general audiences will be excited about seeing, or will get into it? Or do you think it's going to kind of only really be for those like Dune enthusiasts, I guess?
I hope that they do a version that people can get into. I think Dune and a couple of the other series, even like not science fiction, but like Lord of the Rings, there are sometimes fans of those series that are very like, you must include everything. Like the Dune series is incredibly long. And so there are people who are going to be like, well, in 5 books later, that's not what that character does. And like, I think we need to let that go and let the movie be its own thing and let people enjoy it, because I think it's such an interesting story, but you're not going to... you have to sort of let go of some of those things. So I'm sort of hoping it's more towards that side. I have to say I am one of the people who hasn't read the entire Dune series. I think the first book is really good, and then the rest of it gets like really bogged down in like the geopolitics of drug sales in the universe. And it's like this is a lot. Like I get for somebody, they really want to know how you ship this, but I really don't care how you ship it. And that's not really a big concern to me as a reader. But yeah, I do hope that and I mean, I think it's got a great cast. It's not like Oscar Isaac's in it, and like just I'm blanking on all the names.
Chalamet.
Yeah.
Zendaya.
Yes.
Yeah, like it's got a very cool cast. So I'm hoping that maybe pulls people in who might not have otherwise checked it out.
I'm just gonna say I hated Dune.
It's fair. I understand why.
I read it as an adult. It's got all this hype. I've looked at various lists of the best sci-fi novels ever to try to knock them all off, and read that one and was like, meh, why do people like this? I found the worms gross.
Yeah, the worms are kind of weird. There's a whole weird thing where he's married to this girl from the desert, but then he has to marry a princess to save the world. And so then you have like multiple marriage things going on. So it definitely does get a little bit weird.
Weird spiritualism that I wasn't that into.
Yeah, no, I think it is for some people, and other people it's just like, what is happening?
To me, it was fantasy masquerading as sci-fi.
And I think that's fair. And that's probably, I think there are those books that I read where an example I think is really good is the Wen Spencer books, which are the Tinker books. And it's basically if Philadelphia was Brigadoon, the city of Philadelphia goes to a planet of elves, but the elves are genetically modified humans. So like it's got those elements because the elves do magic and they're elves, but when you get into the series a little bit longer, there's sort of these pseudo-scientific explanations for it. And I do think that there's sometimes that crossover where what I think of as like soft science fiction, right? Where we sort of wave a wand, and instead of it being a wand, we're like, it's DNA. And we're not going to explain it any further than that. Please don't look behind the curtain. But they still sort of claim it as science fiction. And I think that sometimes a fuzzy line, and sometimes books get marketed as one or the other when really they're more in the middle.
Yeah.
I want to ask a little bit more about what types of science fiction you both enjoy, and maybe I'll pull back a little and start with what types are there?
Oh my goodness, Caroline, I don't even know that we could give you a full list. I think they multiply in the night like rabbits.
Which is its own type of science
I'm
fiction.
sure. Yeah, I think the ones that I like, I think as I sort of said, and Vicky said a little bit, like I love space operas. I love those kind of galactic empires, like people think of sort of Star Wars, something where it's like lots of planets and things happening all across the worlds. I also love cyberpunk. That's kind of more trying to think how it's more of a modern sort of style where you have one of the books that I love is Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson, and it's sort of like corporations have become countries, and a computer virus has learned how to hack people, and it's always, I think of them as very funny. Like there's the main character in Snow Crash is called Hero Protagonist, like that's his name. So it's sort of a genre that pokes fun at itself a little bit, which I think is kind of sometimes the more hard science fiction, which is another genre where science fiction that's really rooted in science as we know it today. And I like that too, but I think sometimes it takes itself a little more seriously maybe than the cyberpunk, where they might sort of have a little bit more sense of humor about it.
I don't know. I think cyberpunk can be pretty serious too. Like Neuromancer doesn't have much of a sense of humor.
That's true.
I think it's more. Who wrote Neil Stevenson? I think that's more specific to him versus like William Gibson's stuff. I've only read a few William Gibson novels, but they're like
they
he's
take
themselves pretty serious.
That's true. That's true.
Meg, I have to ask you, have you played the game Cyberpunk 2077?
I have not. It is sort of on my list of games to get.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do love cyberpunk books, so we'll see what happens.
Have you played, Bryce? I know you were looking forward to the game.
I did. I purchased it. It's actually a pretty good game. It's one of those games though where like I started it and then all my friends are playing Call of Duty, so I'd probably spend more time playing that. And like when I go back to Cyberpunk, I want to start all over again because I didn't get that far into it, but I kind of feel like it's one of those games I think you really have to like immerse yourself in to really enjoy and get like the full effect of. So yeah, I want to like be able to sit down and know that, okay, I'm going to put Call of Duty aside finally and really immerse myself in this world. But the game looks fantastic, and it's, I've seen a lot of stuff online with people playing it as well. And if you're into that's sci-fi and that sort of thing, I think, Meg, I'm curious to see once you get a chance to play it, what your thoughts are on it.
For sure.
So one of the genres that we haven't touched on, I guess I touched on it earlier, but like dystopias and post-apocalyptic novels, like that's kind of one of the ones that I enjoy. Or speculative fiction we've mentioned as well, which is I think of maybe Kurt Vonnegut is falling into that category, or some of Kim Stanley Robinson's books. Like I recently read Ministry of the Future, which if you want to get super, super depressed about climate change and like what the world might look like in 20, 30 years, I had a near existential crisis reading it, but it's very good. Just, maybe be mentally prepared. I had to text Angelica while reading it saying, I don't know if I can finish this. It's too depressing. So that, that near future speculative fiction, hard science, they all sort of, it's like all a Venn diagram. So many of these books cross multiple sort of subgenres. What other ones are there, Meg? I'm blanking now on like additional categories.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's any kind of genre that exists, there's probably a science fiction equivalent, right? Like there's ones that have more of a romance focus. There's ones that like are more zombies and like medical kind of science fiction. Clones, like I was reading earlier, that are kind of focused on that biology kind of aspect. And I think that's kind of what like when people like Bryce, when you're sort of saying you haven't found the right science fiction book, like that's kind of what I think of, is I think that there's such a broad range of science fiction that it's sort of interesting to maybe match like what do you read and see like what kind of science fiction maybe might fit with that, like things like The Martian, which are very more in that hard science, or another one I really like in the hard science is Julie E. Cisneros' Survival series, which her main character is a salmon biologist who gets like plucked from BC into space basically to have to like solve the biology problems of this alien, alien species that are happening. So and then I think we didn't really talk much about First Contact. So that's another kind of big genre, I would say, is like how do humans get involved in the greater universe and how do they kind of get along with them? So, I mean, it's sort of hard to say all of them, but I think that's another big one that we may have not mentioned.
Do you know, as readers, what you're drawn to in books? Is it character? Is it setting? Is it? Do you look for a really plot-driven novel?
I think there's a few different things that can draw me in. Like, I like science fiction. A lot of like the really excellent science fiction is really talking about current issues, like issues that are current in the time, or anxieties sort of within society, that are just explored through this hypothetical or theoretical space. So like The Left Hand of Darkness sort of expands on, it looks at gender relationships and proposes, some questions about gender. So I think that's one of the main things that can be very attractive about science fiction. There's the escapist aspects of it as well. There's also just like with the hard science, I think it is just that imaginative, like the ideas can just be so fascinating to think about. So those are some of the things that really pull me into, and some just have roaring great plots too, just like the really action oriented, they can be really thrilling, like some of the big space opera where, sort of a subgenre in that would probably be like the political intrigue ones, these galactic empires and all the machinations between them. So I can get pretty into some the minutiae of the politics sometimes. In novels, like the Imperial Rat trilogy is one of my favorites. So Ancillary Justice is the first one. I spoke about it actually on our podcast episode as well. So I'm just going to plug it again. But that one, it's all about sort of these political maneuverings that are happening at this personal level, and I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously all science fiction is written by people, so you can't escape humanity in your science fiction. But I do think that that's what is so interesting about it, is getting to see those different worlds and those what ifs, and that just kind of a chance to send up, or not even send up, but just sort of explore, like, why are we assuming that the way that we do things is the one right way, when like maybe there's a way to think about things a bit differently. And it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy, like, I read a lot of science fiction by sort of marginalized groups or women or people of color. And I think that that's sort of a really interesting change that's happened in the genre. Like, I think part of what Vicky and I were talking about with like the people in the 50s and the 60s is like, it's a lot of old white guys. And nowadays, like, so much science fiction is really being explored by people from different backgrounds. And I think that's such a cool way to see like Afrofuturism, when we're talking about like, and that's sort of a genre that's really focused on Black experiences, but not focused on like the trauma of slavery or generational traumas. It's like, what if we were living in a really positive space that was really bounded by Black culture, and like, what could that look like, and not having to be a reaction to things that are, maybe our real life today. And so I do think that there's some really cool and interesting things about that. And so like the science fiction I'm drawn to probably has those kinds of stories, and it's still very plot driven or character driven, like, because it has a little of that story, but it does have that different society. One series that I've been reading forever is CJ Cherry's Foreigner series.
Oh, yes.
So good. Oh my gosh. And that one is
She writes aliens so well.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. So good. So in that series, there's like a little island of humans on an alien planet, and First Contact went really wrong. Like humans came in and we're like, let's make friends with everybody. We're humans. We're going to break down barriers because we know best. And then the aliens are like, we have barriers for a reason. You have ruined everything. Go live on this island and think about what you did for 200 years. And then like, that's the beginning of the series, is that there's one human who's allowed to come as a translator to the mainland and speak to the aliens on this planet that we're sort of living on. So there's lots of like, how does language and biology impact, as well as just what is society? Like they have assassins as a part of their society, but that's their law enforcement. So if you do something wrong, the other person's assassin is just going to come and kill the leader, but there won't be a war. So it's sort of like this argument of like, what is moral to say? Like we would as humans be like, of course you can't just assassinate people. That doesn't solve problems. But from the aliens' perspective, going to war, like why would you kill the innocent people on the ground? Like how does that solve a problem? It's the leader who made the decision that caused the conflict, and so they're the one who should pay. So it just sort of gets into a lot of really interesting kind of, again, going back to those like how we do things and why do we assume that they're right. But it's like 25 books or something. It's a really long series. But I like that too. And maybe Vicky can talk to that. I love long series. I love that happens in science fiction, where maybe you start with one set of characters and you see them through, and then because you've built this world, you can have different sets of characters or different stories told in it over kind of a long series, and you kind of get to keep going back and see how that transitions or changes over time.
I actually love the series where you don't have to read them in any order. I actually got lost in Foreigner and I can't remember where I stopped reading, so to try to reorient myself feels hard. But CJ Cherry's Alliance Union. Yes. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
yes.
good.
When I was talking about the political sort of machinations, I was thinking about that series because I just love her writing so much. So that's like one of the series you can just drop into any one book and sort of start to form a picture of the whole, but you don't need to read them in any particular order. And the other series that I like just adore that does that is the Culture series by Ian Banks. If there's one fictional universe I could live in, it would be the Culture. It's fantastic, and it's so funny and irreverent, and the best utopia that I've ever seen written.
I want to go back, Vicky. I think it's the Foreigner series, and you mentioned that the author writes aliens really well. Could you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
I actually think of a different series she wrote, the Channer series, which has these ridiculous covers. I remember I was a student page, so I was a high school student shelving books at the library. And I distinctly remember shelving these books and thinking they looked so stupid because they had cat people on the cover, and it just seemed so pulpy and garbage to me.
Sure do.
And so once I, as an adult, discovered this author and started reading her, I avoided that trilogy for a long while because I thought they were ridiculous. And then I read them. They're awesome. The cat people are some of the best aliens I've ever read. Like, she's just able to put you into the psychology of something other so well. I can't put my finger on what it is, but she's a very psychologically driven writer. All of her stories are told from a single viewpoint, and the reader only knows that one character's viewpoint, so you never get sort of that the omniscience of other authors. So she's just so good at it. I'm so delighted to hear you mention CJ Cherry because I find she's just not as well known as she should be.
I think, sort of thinking about that, I think a lot of science fiction, and this is not bad, but a lot of writers kind of write from the human perspective only. Like if you read the book, it's going to be the first contact. You're in a human's head and they're reacting to this kind of bewildering things that the aliens are doing against us, or for inexplicable reasons they attack us. And who knows why? I'm sure it's fine. We're humans. We didn't do anything wrong. Whereas I think like CJ Cherry and some of the people who do that better, it's a little bit more like, they try to really make it be logical internally why the aliens would do things, as opposed to it just being like, oh, they came in and wiped us out for no good reason, and that's why the apocalypse happened or whatever. Like there's whether or not it's a logic that we would understand, like there is at least some internal logic that I think she does a good job of explaining and keeping consistent so that you're not sort of like, why 20 pages later or a book later is this happening? It doesn't make any sense with what happened in the another one who, again, take with a bit of grain of salt is Orson Scott Card and the Ender books.
Yes.
The Formics, which are the bug aliens in that. I think he does a good job of sort of like, what would an insectoid society that's run by a queen, like what would that look like, and what would their reactions be, and how would they see individual life differently than we do? There's a lot in that about like the Formics don't see just killing people as a bad thing, because for them only killing a queen is really murder. And you sort of think, oh, okay, that's, when you think about bees or you think about bugs, you can sort of see why that might be a society might come up and think that way. So I think that's sort of something that's kind of interesting too.
Important to keep in mind, Vicky, if you get your bee set up in your yard.
Vicky, you kind of touched on a little bit like some of these books kind of really going into like the politics and everything. And, when I think like politics when it comes to sci-fi, a couple of things come to mind. First, of course, is Star Wars, and then the other being Star Trek. So there's so many spin-off Star Trek books and Star Wars books. So have any of you read these before, and what are your thoughts on them? Caroline, I know that you are a big Next Generation fan. Have you read any of the Star Trek books?
I don't think that I have. Here's what I do. I either get into something. Most recently, I think it was Picard, when I watched the Picard series of Star Trek, or if I watch some Star Wars movies, I'll think, I'm going to read these, and I put them on hold. I might read one, maybe dip into it, but by the time I look at it and think, I'm already kind of moving on to something else. I've had that taste of it for me. I did become a little bit obsessed with Princess Leia. A couple of years ago, I went through a very big Leia phase, and I put everything on hold, but most of the things that I read were for younger readers. So I have really enjoyed some of the Star Wars expanded universe stuff, but not really any of the things for adults.
Vicky and Meg, is that, you probably devoured a ton of sci-fi books growing up. Like, did you kind of dip your toes into that water of the Star Trek or Star Wars spin-off books? Or maybe even Doctor Who?
So I was super obsessed with Star Wars as a teenager. They were re-released. The original trilogy was re-released when I was in junior high in the theaters, and went to see them with my family. And then we got them on VHS, and I pretty much wore them out. I even used our 2 megs of web space to create a fan page. So super hardcore obsessed. So I read a handful. I read the novelizations of the original trilogy, plus some of the spin-offs. But I'm really particular about canon. So things that I view as apocryphal, I'm not really into. And they're generally kind of poorly written. I'm kind of fussy about the quality of fiction. So I should say they're unevenly written. So they just aren't written to the same quality level as some of the other things that I like. So yeah, I had my really intense Star Wars phase, and I read some then, but not since. And it's a weird thing. I was reflecting on this question, and yeah, I didn't quite realize that I was so particular about canon until I thought about it. But yeah, it has to be legit or I'm not in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I also
so not a fan fiction reader.
Yeah, I also did not read them. I think for me the main problem I had was I really love character development, and so I would find these little pocket books that they couldn't impact anything because they had to leave things in that very stasis-y area to be able to fit in wherever in the series of movies or television shows you were, right? You couldn't have Data go off and have this big thing happen to him because he had to come back to the ship because he was in the next TV episode people were going to watch. And so for me, that always just sort of seemed like, what's the point? Like, nothing is going to happen to these characters that I am going to feel like I've learned something about them or I've learned something about their world. And so and I do agree they were sort of unevenly written. And at various times, I feel like they were ghost written. Like it was almost like it was really hard to tell who wrote them. So even if you did find somebody who, oh, this is a really, like, I like the way that this person writes these characters, it sometimes wasn't easy to find just that person. I think they've stopped doing that quite so much now. I think it's a little bit easier to identify who has written what, but I feel like at some point in my childhood, I tried to track a person and I was like, I can't even tell who did, like, where is this from?
Yeah, I mean, they churned those books out. Like, I kind of went down a Wikipedia rabbit hole.
There's so many
of Star Wars books. And I remember buying one on like a camping trip, I think in like high school, maybe, just to read when I was like on a family camping trip. And what I remember about it, I tried to remember which one it was, and I'm quite certain it was the Trucid Baccarat. I'm pretty sure because it came out in 93. I was doing the math. I was like, this is probably it. But yeah, I remember there's a scene in like, there's a part in that book where it looks like Luke Skywalker died. And of course, like, I'm reading it, I'm like, they didn't kill off Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, there's no stakes, right? Like what can happen? There's like, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I find that that's pretty common in sometimes when I'm thinking of Star Trek characters, which overall I'm more familiar with that side of things, where there'll be a one-off character or a slightly recurring character, and then you're like, oh, this is great. I hope, Shelby comes back and we get to follow, and you look and it's like, well, yeah, she did have this career, but it's in this book that happens. And I think that a lot of the character development for characters that they didn't know what to do with happens in those questionable canon extensions of the series.
I will say one exception. If anybody's read Red Shirts by John Scalzi, it's a whole story about the red shirts from Star Trek who always get killed on away missions. So like, he's not trying to fit it into the canon, and of course he does it in a slightly different world so that he can get away with what he needs to get away with. But the whole book is sort of like, what happens to those background characters on a ship where, like, why is the captain and the first officer always going on these away missions? Like, they're always gonna get killed. Like, we're gonna get killed because they can't die. Like, this is dumb. So like, it pokes fun a little bit at like what the thoughts of these background characters would be. Like, this is a really dumb way to run a ship. Why would we run a ship this way? And so like, it's again a little bit more comedic, but I do recommend that for maybe people who've had that thought too.
Are there certain titles or maybe even a series that you would recommend for people to check out if they're looking to dip into the world of sci-fi?
I think of, for me, I would actually recommend Kurt Vonnegut. He's questionably sci-fi. Some people might not classify him. He has a couple books that are definitely sci-fi. But Slaughterhouse-Five is one of my all-time favorite novels. I've read it a million times. It's so good. It's a modern classic. And the first time I read it, I was like, wait, what? There's an alien abduction? What the heck? Because it's considered one of the greatest anti-war novels of all time, but there's an alien abduction in the middle of it. So it's a really interesting weaving of, literary concepts, his really acerbic humor, the trauma of World War II, and, these high concept sci-fi tropes as well. So there's a sci-fi author, a fictional sci-fi author called Kilgore Trout that appears in almost all of his novels. And there's stories that there'll be like a page description of a novel written by Kilgore Trout that appears in the novel, but that's in some of his novels, that's the extent of the science fiction. It's just like a character becomes obsessed with Kilgore Trout, and so you hear about a few of the stories that he's written. Because Vonnegut says he thought he wanted to be a sci-fi author, but he could come up with ideas but never fleshed them out. So that's how he got away with it in his fiction.
Yeah, I think, as I said, it really depends what books you read outside of science fiction. I think one series that I really love is Lois McMaster Bujo's Vorkosigan saga, which has a couple, like as Vicky was saying, it's got a couple main characters. So there's a couple different places that you can start in that series. Shards of Honor or Young Miles or Cordelia's. There's a couple different places you can start in that. And it's kind of a big space opera, but not too highly technical. So if that sort of puts you off, it's mostly about this one young man and his family and kind of how his world gets reintroduced to the galaxy, and he kind of goes on these big space adventures. So very kind of Star Warsy, and but a little bit less hard science. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I really love Snow Crash, again, for people who might like something a little more funny, by Neil Stevenson. And or I guess what's the other one? Old Man's War by John Scalzi might be a good one for people who are just starting out. Again, it's not too hard science, but it's more about people who, at the end of your life, if you don't want to give up living, you can decide to be reborn into a clone body. Again, clone bodies are coming up a lot today. And you can go and fight in an intergalactic war, and you've got to do that to pay off the cost of your rebirth. And so it's all these like 90-year-olds going to war, right? So it's just kind of has both a little bit of humor and also like, kind of, what is humanity doing? Like, why are we going to war with the universe? So yeah, I think there's a lot of cool places to start. And I actually found a really fun thing. I'll send it to you guys for the show notes, where it sort of has a little like a little tree of, okay, do you like this? Then you would read this book. If you're looking for, politics, go here. If you're looking for First Contact, here. If you want, there's some really fun guides online where you can kind of find a good entry point for you in science fiction. It doesn't have to be a big block that you can't get into.
I might also just recommend, so this is going to expose maybe my recommendation of Vonnegut, and this author will expose that maybe I lean a little towards the literary sci-fi, but Margaret Ratwood, she has a few sci-fi novels, but she has a trilogy, I forget what, the Mad Adam trilogy. Orcs and Crake is the first one in it, and I feel the middle book, I think middle books and trilogies are often the best. The middle book is The Year of the Flood. And it also, if you kind of want a near future that might depress you a little bit, but also ring a little too close to home in some ways, particularly some of the, I've thought about it often, hearing some of the anti-vax rhetoric going about these days, some of the conspiracy theories around vaccines, feel like they could have been lifted out of that novel in part.
I'll also do a plug for EPL's personal picks service. If you are looking to get into sci-fi books or really anything that the library carries, you can go to our website, fill in a short form that says what you're looking for, answer a few questions about what kinds of things you've liked in the past, and EPL staff will get back to you with a list of titles that you can check out and see if you enjoy them. So we'll have a link to that in our item list as well. But before we get to our roundtable questions, Bryce, can you let everyone know what we'll be chatting about on our next episode, which will be available on Friday, August 27th?
Caroline, I've got a question for you. Last few episodes, I've had a question for you. So this one's very similar to that question.
Yeah.
But do you know what kids are into these days?
I really don't. Every time I'm talking to any child, I feel like the Steve Buscemi picture of him pretending to be a teenager and saying like, "What up?" I really don't.
Well, that's a question that we asked actually a few years ago when we did our first Kids Pop Culture Confessions episode. So we're actually going to be exploring this topic again on our next episode, where we'll be interviewing a new group of young Edmontonians about what they're enjoying these days. So we'll get their thoughts on going back to school and what they're up to this summer. And most importantly, what are they reading and watching right now? So we have an interview scheduled for like next week, Caroline. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a little nervous putting the outline together because it has that vibe of like, so what's cool these days that I just feel like these kids are gonna judge me. So I'm a little nervous, but really looking forward to it. We had so much fun on our last episodes that we did with kids, and I think these will be great as well.
All right, so let's get into our round table questions. Meg, if you had the money, would you buy a seat on one of the public space shuttles? And if so, which one?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to go to space, but I really don't feel like that's going to space. So I think I would probably pass and wait a few years. I want to get to the space station. I want to be on the moon. So I would probably save my pennies until I would actually get someplace a little bit farther than high Earth orbit, because it just doesn't quite feel like real space to me yet. But I do think it's so cool that we're, inching closer to that being a reality.
Vicky, how about you?
Well, I'm not really an early adopter, so I like my technology to be a little bit broken in, have some of the, I worked in IT for a while, so alphas, I'm not really into getting on the alpha or even the beta version. I'll wait till it's well established, and, I'll be early, but not super early. But also, we've talked a little bit about my climate anxieties already this episode. There is a little bit of the, would it be ethical to blow myself into space right now?
Maybe we could do something else with the billions.
Yeah, maybe I could spend $1 million on something a little more constructive.
Caroline, how about you?
Nah, I don't think so. I think it's similar to Meg, but also much less adventurous. I'm holding out for the Enterprise. I want to go into space with a holodeck, with transporters, with an arboretum. Like, I want the cruise ship in space experience. And yeah, they're doing their own work. I'm just going on vacation.
Anybody wants to do replicators? Find me. Like, you want to invent those right now? I'm in. But
yeah. So every now and then there'll be a story about like 3D printing food, and I think, oh, we're getting there. But one day that dream will become a reality.
We're almost at that Jetsons level.
Yeah. Bryce, what about you? Do you have your space bag packed?
Not at the moment, no. Just like Vicky, going on that trip right now just does not seem like a great idea. So, yeah, I think it would be really cool. It's funny because, I would have no desire to go all the way up into the space station at all. I think that's really neat. But for me, I'm like, so much could go wrong. So, I like the idea of at least kind of going into orbit, and you're in there. You can say you're up there. You can say you've been to space. But I'm definitely waiting quite a while before I do that. But Vicky brought up a really good point too about just the environmental side of it. Like, do we really need to be shooting ourselves up into space just to say we've been there and we're not really doing anything constructive up there? So
yeah, I mean, I think I feel very different about NASA than I do about billionaires.
All right, Vicky, aliens land in Edmonton. Maybe they're like those cat people that you were talking about, and you have to show them around the city. What does your day look like?
So I feel I would start with a tour of nature to give them an idea of, what our biosphere might look like. So I take them to Mill Creek Ravine or maybe White Mud Park and, walk them around, try to point out some trees and birds that I know the names of if I can. I'm not much of a naturalist, so, it'll be a very limited number of trees and birds that I can point out. After that, we'd of course have to go to the makerspace and show them a taste of, human technology and, be able to show the ways in which we democratize access to all sorts of technology as a, plug for the good that humanity does on this earth. Then we'd go for lunch at one of my favorite downtown restaurants, probably something like Pazzo, one of my favorite places to eat when I'm downtown. Then I think off to the legislature to, be like, here are our politics. Take a look.
No comment.
We wouldn't go into the ledge. I just kind of show them and be like, we do politics. Here's our politics stuff. Then, of course, any visitor to Edmonton, you have to take them to West Ed. Like, you just have to. Probably, I hope I could convince them to get on the roller coaster. Because, again, if you're a visitor to Edmonton, I think you just have to. And then we'd have dinner on Bourbon Street.
Nice. Meg, how about you? What does your day look like?
I mean, I think there's a lot of similar things. I think you want to sort of show off those simple human things, like what's a playground, kids, how kids play together, how do we kind of organize ourselves in houses, like just show them around, like what does a human neighborhood look like, what is a house, schools, all those kinds of things. And then I think one of the big ones, I mean, Edmonton Zoo is big, but also like zoos are weird. Do aliens do zoos? Like that's such a strange concept of a thing that we do as people. So I definitely think the highlight would be kind of like, yeah, let's go see the zoo and see what do they think of this and again, like here's animals of Earth. I don't know.
Caroline, what does your day look like?
We walk through the river valley. We go over the high level bridge streetcar to show off what that's like. We check out the wall downtown at the Milner Library. They get to see dinosaurs and some aquatic life. And then I really just had that we go get green onion cakes because I was really hungry for a green onion cake, and hopefully they would also enjoy them.
Nice. For mine, Caroline, we're starting off the day by interviewing them for overdue fines.
Oh, that's a good
I'd
one.
be really curious to get
scoop.
those over. Yeah, we got to get the scoop. Like if they've asked me to send them around, I'm like, hey, this is part of the day. We got you on an episode of Overdue Finds. So we got that. After that, we are going to explore the river valley for a little bit. And then I'm actually going to take them over to Fort Edmonton Park as well. Maybe get a little bit of our history. They have that new Indigenous learning center there, which, by the way, if you haven't been, you should totally go and check out. It's really neat. And, of course, just like Vicky mentioned, I mean, they're new to Edmonton. We have to take them to West Edmonton Mall. So, yeah, maybe the water slides. I don't know. And then after that, I would try to convince them to take me for like maybe a spin around the city in their UFO.
Bryce, I would say that you'd have to be careful that these aliens aren't like the Signs aliens if you're going to take them to the water park. Like that could end up being like a disastrous first contact.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to be known as the guy who stupidly killed them. So no, I don't need that. Yeah, I was trying to have a nice day with them. What do I know?
Thank you both so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed hearing about this glimpse into the world of sci-fi. Is there anything coming up at EPL that you would like to let people know about?
Well, I would just invite listeners to come check out my branch. Castle Downs is, the jewel of the north side. You can walk around Beaumaris Lake and then stroll into the library for a bit of air conditioning. We are, busy and happy to have customers back in here. You can pop by my office and say hi, and then you can tell all your friends you met one of the stars of Overdue Finds, a guest star of Overdue Finds.
I love that jewel of the north side. Can we get that on? Somebody works in marketing. I think we're missing that on your sign.
We need that, out. CSD, jewel of the north side.
Great. Meg, anything that you want to mention?
Just keep checking out the life skills programs. We've got some great virtual programs coming out both towards the end of summer and into the fall. I think we're going to have some more job seeking classes as well as more cooking, TBD recipes. I haven't yet nailed them down what we're going to be cooking, but we will be cooking more things. And so come join us for those. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if those aren't listed when we put the list together, we'll just include a list or a link to where people can find out more information about EPL's classes and events in general. So take a look for that. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you automatically get our new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We love getting reviews. And as always, if you like what you hear, tell a friend about the show.
As Caroline mentioned, we will have a link to absolutely everything that we talked about in today's show notes. I think this is going to be a really interesting list. There's going to be a ton of great titles on there. But if you want to share your favorite sci-fi titles with us, email us at podcast@epl.ca. Both Caroline and myself get those. Actually, Meg gets those too. So send us an email or hit us up on Twitter by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.